Hi, I'm Shonda. And last night, at my little sister's $1,000,000 wedding, she sat me at the reject table. Then, with a fake smile, she tossed the bridal bouquet, deliberately, away from me. People laughed like I was the joke of the night. But here's what they didn't know. She also drained my savings to pay for that wedding. She's been rewriting my story for years, casting me as the bitter, single sister. But that night, something changed. A hand reached through the noise, and the game flipped. Want to know what happened when the room went silent, and Velma choked on her own spotlight? Stick around. This story doesn't end how she planned. The first thing that hit me when I stepped into the ballroom was the smell of roses, hundreds of them, mixed with the tang of champagne and polished silver. Dallas weddings have a way of being unapologetically grand, but Velma had taken it to another level. Golden chandeliers dripped light across marble floors, and a live jazz trio floated soft notes through the air like butter. Guests in tuxedos and gowns glided across the room, their laughter weaving through the music. I smoothed the skirt of my navy dress and reminded myself to breathe. I'm Shanda, early 30s, the youngest daughter of a family that raised perfection like it was a sport. Velma, 2 years older, had been the family's golden child since she could spell her name. Me? I was the one who quietly did the chores, sent birthday cards, showed up when nobody else wanted to, and somehow slipped out of focus. I'd told myself that tonight, at least, would be different. Just a wedding, just a few hours. But the moment I walked into that glowing hall, it felt less like a celebration and more like walking into an ambush I hadn't seen coming. A smiling usher in a crisp white shirt handed me a card with my name printed in neat black script. Table 12, he said, gesturing vaguely to the far side of the room. I followed his finger and felt my stomach turn. Every elegant round table near the dance floor sparkled with crystal glassware and tiny orchids. My table, tucked near the swinging kitchen doors, looked like an afterthought. The chairs didn't even match. I caught the smell of garlic drifting out whenever the door swung open. When I sat down, I saw who my companions were. A middle-aged man fiddling with his phone, a woman in a faded cocktail dress who introduced herself as a friend of a friend, and 2 teenage boys already scrolling through TikTok. Nobody talked. We were the leftovers, and Velma had placed me here on purpose. My heart thudded as the realization settled. They didn't just seat me, they labeled me. A bridesmaid passed by carrying a tray of drinks. "Don't look too sad tonight, okay?" she whispered as she leaned close enough for me to smell her perfume. "It's Velma's big day." She smiled like she'd done me a favor by saying it. Marion, Velma's friend since college, always had that same sugary tone, like she was talking to a child holding a melting ice cream cone. I looked around the room. Every table near the front was full of couples holding hands, leaning toward each other, laughing in that way people do when they know they're part of the story. My table was a cluster of shadows. Even the napkins were different, plain white, not the embroidered blush pink that graced the other tables. I sipped my water and forced a smile at no one in particular. It wasn't the first time Velma had turned me into a prop. As kids, she used to parade me around at birthday parties as my shy little sister. Even now, standing at the center of the room in a gown that probably cost more than my monthly rent, she drew all the light. She swept by at one point, her new husband's arm hooked through hers, and stopped just long enough to introduce me to a cluster of Richard's wealthy relatives. "This is Shanda," she said brightly. "Our little career woman, still waiting for her special someone." The words landed like a slap. They chuckled politely, one even patting my arm as though I were a stray dog they'd found on the street. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My throat felt thick. They smiled with that kind of pity you can smell before you see it. Velma moved on, trailing laughter and sequins, while I stayed behind like a smudge she'd forgotten to erase. I picked up my napkin and twisted it in my hand until the fabric felt like rope. My reflection stared back at me from the polished silverware, eyes dry, face calm. Inside, though, it burned. I told myself, don't cry here. Don't give her that. Not tonight. Across the room, I caught the faint sound of Velma's circle laughing again. Maybe it was a joke about something else, but it reached me like knives anyway. I forced a swallow and straightened my back. This wasn't over. She thought seating me at the reject table was the end of the joke, but she hadn't even started yet. I could tell something was brewing the second I saw her whispering to her bridesmaids again. Velma's lips curled just enough, her eyes flicking in my direction with that same smug gleam she used to give me in high school when she accidentally wore my clothes to a party and got praised for my style. I kept my head down, poking at a grape that had rolled out of the cheese platter in front of me. I wasn't hungry anymore. I wasn't sure if I ever had been. The DJ's voice cut through the music. "All right, ladies, you know what time it is. It's bouquet toss time." The room erupted in cheers. Forks hit plates, glasses clinked. I froze. Velma stepped onto the dance floor with exaggerated flair, bouquet in hand like a queen holding court. Her bridesmaids trailed behind her in glittery gowns, giggling like they were back at sorority rush. I glanced around for an exit, but the only path away from the dance floor was blocked by a waiter carrying a tray of crème brûlée. I considered hiding under the table, but it wasn't the kind of night I'd get away with disappearing. I slid out of my chair and edged behind a marble column near the bar, clutching my purse like it could shield me from the circus. Maybe if I stood still long enough, I could melt into the wallpaper. But of course, Marion saw me. She always did. "There you are," she said, grabbing my arm with a grip just tight enough to pretend it was affectionate. "Come on, Shanda. Don't be shy. Maybe tonight's your lucky night." Her smile was stretched too wide, her eyes too bright. "I'm good, really," I said, trying to pull back. But she was already steering me toward the dance floor. "Nonsense! It's tradition! You can't miss this!" Next thing I knew, I was standing in a circle of 20-something girls with perfect curls and champagne giggles. Their heels clicked like tap dancers across the marble floor as they jostled into place. I stood a head taller than most of them, and a decade older. Someone behind me snorted. I didn't turn around. I felt exposed, like a kid forced to play dodgeball in gym class when you're the last one picked and everyone's aiming for you. My dress suddenly felt too tight. Velma turned around to face the crowd, still holding the bouquet. Her eyes locked on mine, and then she smiled. Not the kind of smile you give family, the kind of smile you give right before lighting a match. She turned back, raised her arms high, counted 1, 2, and on 3, she tossed the bouquet, hard, in the exact opposite direction. It sailed clean over my head, arcing across the room like a perfect pitch, straight into Chloe's waiting hands. Chloe, our cousin from Austin, 24, newly single, and always angling to be in the spotlight. The crowd cheered like someone just hit a home run. Velma clapped her hands together dramatically and threw her arms around Chloe. "Looks like Shanda will have to wait a little longer," she announced. That sentence landed like a slap dipped in glitter. I stood frozen as laughter rippled out in waves. I caught the tail end of a smirk from Richard's aunt. Someone else murmured, "That was cold," but I couldn't tell if they meant the air conditioning or Velma's aim. In that moment, all the noise felt far away, muffled, like I was underwater watching people talk behind glass. I stepped back, heels clicking against the marble, breath shallow. My fingers curled into my palm. I was trembling, but no one saw. Back at the reject table, I sank into my seat without remembering how I got there. My wine glass sat untouched, condensation pooling in a ring on the white cloth. "She made me the joke of her wedding," I whispered. And they all laughed. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Something sharp pressed against the inside of my ribs. The shame I'd swallowed all night was turning into something heavier, something hotter. Rage. That was new. And it wasn't loud or messy, it was steady. I wasn't crying, I wasn't leaving. Not yet. I reached for my purse and stood. My feet felt steady, even if my pulse didn't. I told myself I'd go to the powder room. Just get some air. Maybe leave, maybe not. Then, just as I turned to walk away, a voice behind me said, low and deliberate, "Act like you're with me." The words were so low I almost thought I'd imagined them, but when I turned, there he was. A tall man in a charcoal gray suit, shoulders broad, tie loosened just enough to look effortless. His presence seemed to calm the noise around us. His eyes, steady, serious, a hint of kindness, met mine like a hand reaching through the chaos. "I'm Alaric," he said quietly, leaning in so only I could hear. "Your sister spent 10 minutes telling my colleague how pathetic it is you're still single. I thought you might need some company." For a heartbeat, I just stared at him, trying to read his face. This wasn't pity. He wasn't smirking. There was a steadiness in his tone I hadn't felt from anyone tonight. "Why would you—" My voice trailed off, unsure how to finish the question. Why would a stranger care? Why step into this minefield? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took the empty seat beside me at the reject table like it was the most natural thing in the world. He draped one arm across the back of my chair, not touching me, but close enough to send a message. Heads began to turn immediately. Across the room, Velma's laughter faltered. I saw her freeze mid-sentence, her eyes narrowing, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Alaric picked up my untouched wine glass and pushed it gently toward me. "You don't have to drink it," he murmured. "Just hold it. Smile if you can." I didn't smile exactly, but I did straighten my shoulders. The air felt different now. Conversations at nearby tables softened into whispers. Richard's aunt, the one who'd patted me like a lost puppy earlier, was staring openly. Velma didn't stay seated long. She excused herself from a cluster of cousins and crossed the room with that measured stride she uses when she wants to look like she's floating instead of marching. Her smile was there, but stiff, like it had been painted on. "Shanda," she said slowly, her gaze flicking between us. "I didn't know you knew Alaric." Alaric turned to her with the smooth confidence of someone used to boardrooms and ballrooms alike. "Old friends," he said easily. "We're reconnecting tonight." Velma blinked. It was just a second, but I saw the crack in her mask. She forced a chuckle. "Oh, how nice. I just love surprises." I could almost hear the guests leaning in to listen. The power in the room was shifting, and she knew it. For the first time that night, the eyes on me weren't dripping with pity. They were curious, maybe even impressed. I caught a murmur from somewhere behind Velma. Someone saying Alaric's name like it meant something. Wealth, connections, a reputation that preceded him. Alaric leaned in slightly, his breath warm near my ear. "She looks like she bit into a lemon," he said softly. "Let's keep it that way." I let out a laugh I didn't plan, a sound so different from the brittle chuckles I'd faked earlier that it startled me. It felt real. Velma's smile tightened. "Well," she said, voice pitched just a little too high, "I'm just so glad Shanda finally found someone." The sarcasm dripped, but it fell flat. Alaric didn't even flinch. He just reached for a bread roll and tore it calmly, like he had all night to sit here with me. Velma hesitated, searching for a new angle, then decided to retreat. "Enjoy yourselves," she said, and walked away before anyone could see how rattled she was. I watched her go, my pulse steady for the first time since I'd walked into the hall. The shame she'd tried to burn into me all evening was already losing its grip. Alaric stayed. He didn't hover or pry. He asked about my work, my life, actually listening, not waiting for his turn to talk. I told him about my small marketing firm, the clients I'd built from scratch, how I'd been too busy to date seriously. He nodded like none of it surprised him. Somewhere across the room, Velma was laughing again, but it sounded brittle now. The band shifted into a slow song, the kind meant to draw couples onto the dance floor. Alaric rose, smoothing his jacket. He extended his hand toward me, palm steady. "Dance with me." I hesitated, glancing at the sea of eyes I knew would follow us. My heart raced, not from fear, but from something new I couldn't yet name. I slipped my hand into his, and for the first time in years, I felt the ground shift beneath me. As his fingers wrapped around mine, something inside me steadied. I wasn't used to this, being seen, let alone being shielded. And as Alaric led me gently onto the dance floor, the warmth of his hand on the small of my back, my feet moved before my mind could catch up. The soft jazz number filling the room had a slow, swaying rhythm, and the golden lights above dimmed just enough to cast everything in a gentle haze. Around us, laughter still bubbled from tables, but it felt distant now, like background noise in a world I wasn't part of anymore. For the first time that night, I wasn't observing the party from the sidelines. I was in the center of it. His touch was sure but respectful. My hand rested lightly on his shoulder, my steps hesitant at first. I could feel my body resisting the moment, years of second-guessing, of tensing up, of staying small, my jaw clenched without realizing. But then Alaric leaned in, voice low and calm. "Breathe," he said. "They don't matter right now, just us. Let go of her. This is your moment, not hers." Something cracked open in me. I exhaled slowly, and in that breath, the stiffness began to melt. I stopped counting my steps. I stopped thinking. My body finally moved with his, not in defense, but with purpose. My chest lifted, my chin came up, and I danced. Around us, whispers stirred again. I caught a glimpse of Velma standing near the dessert table, her eyes drilling into us like daggers. Her smile was still fixed, but it was too wide, too tight. That mask she wore so well was beginning to slip. From the corner of my eye, I saw Richard's mother whisper something to an older man, one of his uncles, I think, who leaned forward, eyes narrowing toward us. A woman at the next table whispered behind her hand. I didn't hear the words, but I recognized the tone. Curious, not mocking. For once, I wasn't the sad, single sister tucked in a corner. I was the woman dancing with the one man in the room who made Velma look like background noise. I felt Alaric's hand adjust slightly, firm and reassuring. We turned slowly with the music, and I let myself settle into it fully. My heels didn't ache as much. My skin didn't feel too exposed anymore. I was in control. For the first time in a long time, I felt enough. But then, like clockwork, the air shifted. Velma's train swished against the marble floor as she stormed forward, dragging her new husband in her wake like he was a prop. I could feel her presence before she spoke. The temperature seemed to drop a degree. She stepped into our circle of movement, her smile brittle and eyes sparkling with something far colder than joy. "Mind if I cut in?" she asked, too brightly, glancing between us as if daring me to protest. I tensed. My hand stiffened slightly in Alaric's, but he didn't even blink. He turned to her with that same calm grace that had drawn every eye in the room. "Actually, yes," he said smoothly. "We're having a moment." The silence that followed wasn't silent at all. You could hear the oxygen suck out of the room. Someone at a nearby table gasped. A fork clinked against porcelain. The band didn't miss a beat, but the energy had shifted. Everyone felt it. Velma's face didn't fall immediately. She blinked a few times, lips parting, trying to find a response that wouldn't sound desperate. "Oh," she laughed, sharp and airy. "Of course. How sweet." But her voice wavered at the edges. She didn't retreat so much as spin away, her dress catching on her heel slightly. Richard, who had followed her like a ghost, gave Alaric a brief, uncertain nod before scurrying after her. Alaric leaned down toward me, his breath tickling my ear. She hates not knowing everything, he said, a half-smile tugging at the edge of his mouth. Let her stew. This time when I laughed, there was no bitterness in it, just lightness. It rose up and spilled out before I could stop it. It was mine. For so long, Velma had built her power on silence. Mine, mostly. On my obedience. On the way I'd trained myself to be quiet, to keep peace. But now the crowd had seen her stumble, and they'd seen someone, finally, say no to her. The song began to slow, nearing its end. We moved together, turning once more beneath the golden glow of the chandeliers. My dress rustled softly with each step. My heart beat loud but steady. I think they're going to talk about this dance more than her vows, I said quietly. Alaric smirked. Good. That dress deserved a better story. As the music faded, he didn't drop my hand. His fingers tightened just enough to let me know he wasn't done. This is only the beginning, he murmured. I looked past his shoulder and saw Velma standing stiffly by the bar, eyes locked on us, fury masked under a tight smile as she nodded absently to a guest. And he was right, because Velma wasn't done, and neither was I. The music shifted again, lighter, bouncier. The band picked up something playful, something meant to get people moving, laughing, clapping along. I recognized the cue before the DJ's voice even cracked through the speakers. Ladies, it's that time. Get ready for the bouquet toss. A low murmur spread through the room like ripples in water. Chairs creaked as women stood, napkins dropped to laps, and heels clicked toward the center of the hall. I stayed seated, my fingers curled lightly around the stem of my wine glass, watching the motion, but not moving. Not yet. Then a firm hand landed on my shoulder. Come on, Shanda, Marion said, her voice sweet but with that tone that always rubbed me wrong, like I was being guided, not invited. You're not getting out of this one. Before I could protest, she pulled me up and nudged me forward, laughing like this was some big inside joke. Maybe it was... The space near the dance floor filled quickly. Girls in their 20s, cousins I barely knew, Velma's friends from college, even a few coworkers I recognized from Instagram photos. And then there was me. Pushed into the edge of the group, still holding my purse because no one told me to leave it behind. My heels already ached. I scanned the crowd, catching Velma's eye across the room. She was standing on the small platform near the DJ, bouquet in hand, all eyes on her. Her smile was wide, perfect, but when her gaze locked with mine, something tightened in her expression. Just a flicker. That wasn't joy. That was something colder. I knew that look. I'd known it since we were kids. The DJ hyped up the moment, drawing laughter from the crowd. All right, ladies, this is your shot. Next bride in line. Velma raised the bouquet above her head, striking a dramatic pose. Her bridesmaids clapped like she was on a runway. The room buzzed with anticipation. Ready? She shouted, her voice sticky sweet. This one's for good luck. She turned around slowly, back to us, and I instinctively took a half step back. Something in my stomach dropped. Not nerves. No, it was dread. The same feeling I'd get when Velma would pretend to include me in something, only to pull the rug out in front of everyone. She paused, lifted her arms high, and then spun around. Too fast, too sudden, and flung the bouquet. Not backward, not blind. She launched it with a clean, precise arc, away from me, over everyone's heads, toward the far edge of the group. The bouquet landed squarely in the hands of Chloe, one of our youngest cousins, who squealed like she'd won a lottery. Around her, women clapped and laughed, some even whistling. I didn't move, didn't blink. The laughter spread like fire. One woman near me muttered, just loud enough, "Well, I guess we know who won't be next." Someone else giggled. Another echoed the comment, and I felt it catch, spreading, deepening. My face burned, neck prickling hot. I stood frozen. Purse still in my hand, arms limp at my sides. "Oh dear," Velma said, turning back toward us with a laugh that hit my ears like glass shattering. "I guess my aim is terrible." She covered her mouth with faux shock, eyes scanning the crowd until they found mine again. She didn't even try to hide it. The smugness, the satisfaction. Around me, the women scrambled, still giggling, clapping Chloe on the back. They bought it. Or maybe they didn't. Maybe they just didn't care. To them, it was a joke, a tradition, a funny little moment. To me, it was a spotlight. It was Velma, once again, making sure I stayed small. I tried to smile, but my lips wouldn't cooperate. My throat felt tight, like a hand was wrapped around it. My fingers clenched the strap of my purse until they ached. The room was still moving, the music playing again, but I felt detached, like I was watching everything through a glass pane. You don't belong. You never have. That voice, the one I'd worked so hard to quiet over the years, came roaring back. Velma didn't need to scream. She didn't need to humiliate me outright. She'd learned how to do it with charm, with laughter, with everyone watching, and no one quite sure where the line was. Even now, in a room full of people, she made me feel invisible. Then, from the edge of the crowd, I noticed movement. A quiet shift. Not flashy, not loud. Alaric stepped forward. His eyes didn't go to Velma. He didn't glance at the bouquet or the crowd still chuckling. He looked at me, and in that moment, I realized he wasn't going to let her win. Before the laughter had even finished echoing around the hall, before Velma could bask in the aftermath of her little spectacle, Alaric was already moving. He didn't hurry, didn't break into a run. That would have drawn too much attention. Instead, he moved with this quiet purpose, like he belonged in every room he stepped into and didn't need to prove it to anyone. I saw his hand extend just as the bouquet began to descend from its exaggerated arc. Chloe, already laughing, didn't even notice it had shifted direction, but Alaric was there. One clean motion. He plucked it from the air with the casual grace of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Gasps, audible ones. Not dramatic or exaggerated, just honest, surprised inhalations. People noticed. Velma's face stiffened. She stood by the platform, hands still clasped as if frozen in place, eyes narrowed like she was trying to solve a puzzle in real time. She hadn't planned for this. The bouquet, her weapon of humiliation, was now in his hand. And then he turned toward me. Everything around me seemed to slow, then fade. I couldn't hear the music anymore. The chatter dimmed. All I could hear was the sound of my own pulse. His steps were deliberate. Not rushed, not performative. Just sure. Like he knew exactly where he was going and why. He reached me and stopped, just close enough that I could smell the faintest note of cedar and something warmer. Maybe vetiver. I opened my mouth to say something, but nothing came out. He bent slightly, not kneeling like in a proposal, but enough to close the space between us, and held out the bouquet, offering it to me as if it had always been meant for my hands. His voice was low, but not whispering. "This belongs with you." The words didn't explode or echo, but they didn't need to, because the entire room heard them, and just like that, something shifted. The chatter quieted. The chuckles dissolved into awkward silence. Even the ones who had smiled earlier now looked unsure of where to rest their eyes. For a second, it felt like the entire room inhaled at once. I looked at the bouquet, white peonies, blush roses, pale eucalyptus, and then at him. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached out, unsure if this was real. As the stems touched my skin, the weight of it surprised me. Not heavy in a literal sense, but symbolically, it carried something now. Alaric didn't make a speech. He didn't turn and stare Velma down. He simply placed it in my hands, then stepped slightly back, letting me be the focus. That's when the applause began. Soft at first, just one or two scattered claps, then a few more. Not thunderous, not overwhelming, but growing. People clapped. For me. I didn't know how to stand in that kind of moment. I'd grown so used to ducking, shrinking myself to fit Velma's world, to not cause waves. But right then, in that hush-then swelling moment, I stood tall. Across the room, Velma's expression curdled like milk left out in the sun. Her cheeks flushed, not from joy. Richard looked from her to me, brows lifted in genuine confusion. He had no idea how to react. His face stuck somewhere between loyalty and secondhand embarrassment. Velma laughed then, short, brittle. "Oh, Alaric," she said, waving a hand like none of it mattered. "You're such a joker." But her voice faltered just enough. Her eyes kept drifting back to the bouquet. She hadn't expected him to intercept her game, hadn't thought anyone would dare shift the narrative. She was always the one with the final say, the one who could twist a room with a single smirk. Not this time. I held the bouquet, not tightly, but with intention. My thumb traced one of the velvet rose petals. All I could feel was the quiet buzzing beneath my skin. Not love, not even gratitude, but the feeling of being seen. Truly seen. And maybe, for the first time in years, respected. Alaric moved to stand beside me again, close but not overwhelming. He didn't touch me, didn't gloat. He simply watched the crowd, as if daring anyone to make a comment. They didn't. Even Velma, who thrived on controlling every corner of a room, looked suddenly unsure. Her jaw shifted slightly. Her eyes flickered from face to face, trying to recalibrate. My father, sitting at the second table from the front, cleared his throat and looked down at his hands. He couldn't meet my eyes. Maybe he felt something. Maybe he didn't. It didn't matter. I turned toward Alaric slightly. "You didn't have to do that." He tilted his head. "I know." I studied his face. "Then why?" He shrugged lightly. "Because someone should have. A long time ago." A long time ago. The phrase hit me like a bell. So simple. But it cracked something open inside me. He didn't look away. "You've been alone in this room for too long." I didn't answer, not out loud. But I held the bouquet closer to my chest and let the moment settle. For the rest of the evening, Velma didn't come near us. She laughed louder with her friends. She leaned harder into Richard's arm. She posed for photos with wide, gleaming smiles. But every so often, I caught her watching me, like she was sizing me up again, recalculating. And each time, I met her stare without flinching. But just before the last dance began, when the guests had shifted into smaller conversations and the band slowed their tempo, I felt a cold current behind me. Velma. I didn't need to turn around to know. When I finally did glance her way, she wasn't smiling. Not that fake polite one, not the smug kind either. No, this one was sharp, quiet, calculating. A look that promised, "You might have won this round, but I'm not done." And deep down, I knew she meant it. I didn't know it then, but Velma wasn't finished with me. She was only just beginning. After the bouquet moment, the music picked up again. The band shifted back into their upbeat rhythm, couples found their way to the dance floor, and servers resumed gliding through the room with flutes of champagne and plated desserts. But beneath the surface of it all, something had changed. I could feel it, not in the obvious way, but in the way people looked too long, or smiled too briefly. Alaric stayed close, his presence grounding, but not overbearing. I appreciated that more than he could know. I stood near one of the side tables, bouquet still in my hand, and caught a glimpse of Velma across the room. She was posing for photos with Richard and his family, laughing like a pageant queen. But her eyes never really left me. There was something in her gaze that didn't match her smile. I took a slow sip of water, trying to calm the churning in my chest. I knew that look. I'd grown up with it. Velma wasn't retreating. She was recalculating. That's when I noticed her bridesmaids huddled near the cake table, the same three who'd followed her around like sequined shadows all evening. They were whispering, giggling with the kind of energy that was too sharp to be kind. One of them, a petite blonde with a voice like a squeaky toy, tilted her head toward me, then muttered something. They burst out laughing. I froze, but only for a second. My instinct was to brush it off, to convince myself I was being paranoid. But I wasn't. I knew Velma. I knew the patterns. Humiliation was never one big blow. It was a series of small, precise cuts designed to look accidental. The knot in my stomach coiled tighter. Don't, I told myself. Don't give her the satisfaction. I tried to shift my attention back to Alaric, but my ears began catching pieces of conversation that didn't belong to me, and yet they very much did. I heard she begged him to come tonight. She's so desperate for attention. I mean, who brings a guy like that out of nowhere? Still single at her age? Must be exhausting. The words weren't shouted, but they didn't have to be. They floated just loud enough, just close enough. And worst of all, they were spreading like wildfire. Suddenly, I wasn't the woman who'd been publicly validated. I was the pathetic sister, clawing for dignity, the lonely one, the spinster with a borrowed man and a pity bouquet. That damn bouquet. It was still in my hands, heavy now, as if it knew it didn't belong to me, not really. Velma had done it again, reframed the moment to fit her story. That was her gift. She didn't need to argue. She simply adjusted the narrative and let the crowd do the rest. I looked around. Faces turned away too quickly. Others smiled with thin politeness. Some didn't bother pretending. Alaric noticed. Of course he did. He reached for my hand, just a brush of his fingers against mine. Not possessive, not performative, just there. Quiet support. But even that didn't fix the heat rising to my face. I wanted to shout across the room. I wanted to call her out, to tell everyone what she'd done, what she was doing, to expose every lie, every twist of the truth she planted like weeds. I wanted to scream, "She's not the victim. I am." But I didn't, because that's exactly what she was waiting for. Velma always knew how to stay composed. I was the one who lost her temper. I was the one who looked dramatic. And that was the trap. Every time. I swallowed hard and set the bouquet down gently on the nearby table, next to an untouched slice of red velvet cake. It looked ridiculous sitting there, like a prop from a bad play. I wanted to forget it ever touched my hands. Velma was standing near the bar now, smiling as a groomsman handed her a fresh glass of champagne. She toasted to something I couldn't hear, and then turned back toward her bridesmaids. One leaned in. Velma whispered something with a smirk, and they all laughed again, synchronized like wind-up dolls. I felt myself begin to tremble. Not from fear, not anymore. From rage. I was done shrinking. Done apologizing for taking up space. I was tired of having to pretend the little cuts didn't hurt. Velma's gaze flicked my way. She held it this time. No pretense. Just a quiet satisfaction. Like she had completed something. But I didn't look away. Instead, I squared my shoulders and stared right back. No smile. No fury. Just stillness. She blinked. Just once. And that was enough. She didn't win. Not fully. A few minutes passed. The servers brought out dessert plates, small, neat triangles of lemon tart, dark chocolate mousse, and miniature cheesecakes. The chatter rose again, trying to reclaim the festive mood. I sat beside Alaric at a side table, my jaw sore from holding back every word I wanted to say. He leaned over, voice low. "You okay?" I took a breath. "No, but I'm getting there." He nodded like he understood that sentence better than most would. Then, just as I picked up my fork, I heard the soft clink of glass against glass. Velma stood in the center of the room, holding her champagne flute high, her voice ringing out like a polished bell. "To sisters," she said, loud enough to hush the crowd. "The ones who support us." She paused just a beat too long. "And the ones who just show up." There was laughter, some forced, some real, the kind of laugh that lingers. My hand tightened around the fork. The clinking of glasses cut deeper than any bouquet toss ever could. For a split second, the room swelled with polite laughter, soft, scattered, a reflex more than amusement. But beneath the surface, I could feel it. That cold ripple. The way people shifted in their chairs, how some averted their eyes while others leaned in, hungry for what might happen next. Velma stood at the center like a performer who knew exactly how long to hold a note for effect. Her glass still raised, her smile wide enough to hide every dagger tucked behind her words. I sat frozen. The chill of the champagne flute in my hand contrasted the burning under my skin. She had done it again. Another strike, veiled just enough to be denied, obvious enough that everyone felt it. That's how Velma worked. She weaponized suggestion. She never had to say my name. I was the punchline without ever being called to the stage. Alaric, seated quietly beside me, leaned forward slightly, his hand brushing my elbow, grounding me again. I felt it, that tremble I always got before I swallowed pain and smiled it away. But not this time. I set my glass down slowly. The sound of it meeting the table, gentle but final, pulled Alaric's gaze toward me. I stood. The murmur died down almost instantly, like a gust of wind had passed through the room. My voice was low at first, measured. Velma. She turned, mock surprise lighting her face. Oh, Shanda! I didn't see you there. A lie, of course. I didn't hesitate. You've made it perfectly clear what I mean to you tonight. Again. The room quieted to a hush so sharp I could hear the clink of a fork being set down 2 tables over. Velma gave a light, dismissive chuckle. Come on, don't be so sensitive. It's a wedding. Lighten up. Cruelty doesn't become light just because you dress it up in lace and candles. Her expression flickered. A few guests shifted in their seats, some curious, others visibly uncomfortable. I stayed silent for years to keep peace, I continued. But tonight, it's costing me something I'm no longer willing to pay. Velma's eyes narrowed just enough for only me to notice, but that flash of panic was real. Honestly, she said, waving her glass with a too bright grin, this isn't the place. This is a celebration. For who? I asked. For the people who matter to you? Or just the ones who fit into your picture-perfect version of life? A beat passed. The air turned thick. Then she laughed, louder now. Oh, honey, she said with mock affection. You want to talk about truth? Maybe we should tell everyone why you never married. Or is that still a secret? There it was. I felt it hit. Hard. The murmur rippled again, like someone had cracked glass underfoot. My breath caught. My mouth went dry. I could feel their eyes on me. Not cruel, at least not all of them, but curious. The way people look at a car accident, you don't want to stare, but you can't help it. Velma stood taller now, triumphant. It's funny, isn't it, how some people just can't keep anyone around. I mean, years, Shanda. My throat tightened. Shame crept in. That old familiar ghost. She knew exactly where to strike. But then, Alaric stood. No words, no gestures, just presence. His hand touched the back of mine, steady. I looked down, then up, and found my voice again. The difference between us, Velma, I said slowly, is I don't need to tear someone down to feel worthy. That was it. It didn't need to be a scream. It didn't need a mic. It didn't need an audience, even though I had one. There was a pause, long enough to feel like a shift. A few people clapped quietly. One woman nodded toward me with a tight-lipped smile. Another guest, someone I didn't know, actually whispered, "Good for her." Velma's face held the smile, but her eyes lost their shine. Her hand trembled slightly on her flute, And then she muttered, just loud enough for me to hear, "If you think this is over, you're wrong." Her words weren't loud. They didn't have to be. They were a promise. And I knew, deep in my chest, I couldn't walk away this time. The reception hall was quieter now. Not silent, but everything had softened, like people were holding their breath without realizing it. No one clinked glasses anymore. The string quartet picked up a soft melody, but even that felt distant, like it belonged in a different room, in a different night. I stood still, the bouquet still in my hand. It wasn't light, even though it should have been. Funny how something meant to symbolize joy could feel like a chain wrapped in ribbon. Alaric stayed beside me, but he didn't speak. He didn't need to. He knew. This was mine to finish. Velma tried to act unbothered, but the tension around her was unmistakable. Her jaw was tight, her smile frozen in place like a porcelain doll. You could see the cracks forming if you looked close enough, but she wasn't going down without one more strike. "You think you're the victim?" she said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Please, you've always been jealous, Shanda. That's what this is about." A ripple moved through the crowd like wind through grass, uneasy, restless. Some faces turned toward her, others toward me, unsure which direction this was headed. I took a slow breath. Jealous of what, Velma? Of your cruelty? Your constant need to humiliate me in front of strangers? That's all yours. I want no part of it. For the first time all night, I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Something more than anger. It was fear. Just for a second. A voice spoke up from the side of the room. An older woman, someone from my parents' church, I think. I hadn't seen her in years. She stepped forward a little, clearly uncomfortable but compelled. "Is it true," she said, looking at Velma, "that you used Shanda's savings to help pay for all this?" That stopped everything. It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. Just a quiet, clear sentence that sliced through the atmosphere like ice water down a spine. Velma's expression fell. Fully dropped. No mask, no smile, just shock. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't plan for this part. I never told anyone, not even Alaric. But somehow, it had found its way out. Gasps broke the silence like glass shattering. Guests leaned into each other, whispering behind hands. I heard my aunt hiss something under her breath. My uncle looked down at his plate like it might save him from being dragged into the moment. Velma blinked, mouth twitching. "That's ridiculous." But she said it too fast, too defensive. Another guest asked, "Wait, is that why Shanda had to leave her apartment last year?" The whispering swelled now, like a storm gathering speed. I stood still. It wasn't fear anymore. It was release. Velma's face darkened, her tone sharp and cracking. "She's nothing without me. Nothing." It echoed. The whole room heard it. And for once, they didn't laugh. She thought she was shaming me. But what I saw in those faces wasn't pity for me. It was disbelief. For her. Disgust. That's when I knew she was alone in that moment. No performance could pull her out of it now. I didn't respond to her last words. I didn't have to. Instead, I raised the bouquet slowly. My fingers wrapped around the stems with quiet control. What she tried to use as a weapon, what was meant to humiliate me, now felt like something else entirely. "You wanted me invisible," I said calmly. "You spent years making sure I stayed in the background, but tonight, Velma, everyone saw you, the real you." A stillness followed. Then a single clap, then another, and then more. Gentle, hesitant at first, but it grew. It filled the room not with celebration, but with understanding, recognition. Velma stood frozen. Then, without another word, she turned sharply and stalked out of the room. Her gown, once the centerpiece of the night, now dragged behind her like a costume that no longer fit. My father glanced at me but couldn't meet my eyes. His shoulders slumped, and he busied himself with his napkin, folding it and unfolding it, trying to disappear. I didn't feel triumph. No part of this was victory. It was release. Freedom from chasing their approval, from shrinking to fit into their picture of me. I walked slowly back to the table and set the bouquet down. Not with pride, not with malice, just a gentle, final gesture. A symbol of all the times I kept quiet, all the moments I swallowed my pain and smiled for photos, all the versions of me she tried to erase. I brushed my fingers over the petals once, and then I whispered, just for myself. This time, I walked away whole.